Thank you everyone for joining us for today's Fleet Focus webinar for the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project titled EV Infrastructure and Battery Storage Incentive Programs. We have a very stacked lineup for you today, so I'd like to start off by saying thank you to our panelists for contributing to today's webinar, and of course a big thank you to you, our attendees. We'll start off with a couple of housekeeping notes. First off, everyone is put on mute, and we will be recording this webinar for future reference. We'll also be taking questions in the chat box, so feel free to put your questions there and we will try to answer them in between presenters. Lastly, we'd like to apologize in advance for any technical difficulties as we are all working from home. My name is Tim Insalvis. I'm the Senior Project Coordinator for our dealership and fleet incentive programs here at the Center for Sustainable Energy. I'd like to start off by telling you a little bit about CSE. We are a clean energy nonprofit with a single word mission, decarbonize. Our vision is a future with sustainable, equitable, and resilient transportation, buildings, and communities. We do that by administering clean energy programs and offering advisory services throughout the US. So before I hop into the agenda, I'd like to express how excited I am to present this webinar today. I really like to highlight the importance of renewable energy and on-site storage as it pertains to really realizing the major cost savings and resiliency benefits that electrifying your fleet can play. In other words, it's a big piece of the puzzle to saving more money, reducing emissions, and protecting your organization from power outages and blackouts. I've noticed this is a big hurdle for most fleet managers as initial costs can be high, but as you will see today, there are some very strong incentive programs and companies like Baker Electric that really understand this concept and can help you take advantage of these cost savings and resiliency benefits for your organization. So for the agenda, first I'll start off by covering the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project's light duty vehicle incentive offerings for fleets. Next, we'll receive some expert advice from one of our top local San Diego energy services companies, Baker Electric, and they will give us some very important tips and considerations when installing these types of projects. Next, we have incentive program representatives from CALeVIP and SGIP to cover their incentive programs for infrastructure and on-site storage, respectively. So a little bit of background about the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project. It is administered by the Center for Sustainable Energy and funded by the California Air Resources Board. The goal of the program is to really promote the purchase and the adoption of clean vehicles and really hit our goal of 5 million zero-emission vehicles by 2030. So as far as rebate amounts go, they are the same standard rebate amounts as the consumers can receive. So there are 3 different amounts depending on what type of car. You can get $4,500 for a fuel cell, $22,000 for a battery electric, and $1,000 for a plug-in hybrid. So within CVRP, there are 3 different fleet programs. First, for public agencies, such as local governments or state entities, they are eligible for up to 30 rebates annually. Car sharing and rental fleets, such as Blue LA or Enterprise, are eligible for up to 20 rebates annually. Lastly, businesses, nonprofits, federal entities, and tribal communities are only eligible for 1 rebate per lifetime. So what are some of the requirements for this program? Similar to the standard rebate, the car must be brand new and on the CVRP list of eligible vehicles. And all programs must retain ownership in California of the car for a minimum of 30 consecutive months. There is, however, an exception for car sharing and rental fleet programs, as they are eligible for reduced ownership division. So if the car is owned for more than a year, but less than 30 months, they are eligible for up to $1,800 depending on the car type. Good thing about public fleets, they receive a lot of perks with the program. So public fleets are eligible for an increased rebate if they have a facility within a DAC. For this program, we use the CalEnvironScreen 3.0 tool, which is provided by the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment on behalf of the California Environmental Protection Agency. And it helps identify California communities by census tract that are disproportionately burdened by and vulnerable to multiple sources of pollution. So it's a really cool interactive tool that you can check out on our website. There's a link directly at cleanvehiclerebate.org/fleet/public agencies. So these are the increased rebate amounts that you will see: $7,000 for a fuel cell, $4,500 for a battery electric, and $3,500 for a plug-in hybrid. So that's an extra $2,500 on top of the standard rebate amount if you live within a DAC or disadvantaged community. So for public fleets, there's a couple fleet participation requirements. They must submit an annual vehicle usage report at 12, 24, and 30 months after the purchase of the vehicle. We will provide the Excel template, and you will be required to provide data such as mileage, annual fuel use, and the percentage of operation with DACs if you receive the increased rebate. And you are also required to notify us if there is a vehicle change, domicile location change. I'd also like to note that this process is very simple. The Excel sheet is very straightforward, and you shouldn't consider it as too much of a heavy lift. Another major perk for public fleets is that they can reserve their rebates up to 18 months in advance, as opposed to 3 months after purchase, which can be very helpful when budgeting and planning your procurement. So while public fleets can apply 18 months in advance or 3 months after purchase, all other fleets can only apply for the rebate after their purchase, and it must be done within 3 months. The application process is pretty simple and straightforward and is done through our website, cleanvehiclerebate.org. Simply, applicants will check their eligibility online, fill out the application, submit the supporting documents. We will review and process the application and documents internally, and then you will receive your CVRP check in the mail with wait times ranging anywhere between 3 to 5 months, depending on the queue. For public fleets trying to reserve ahead of time, they must certify their intent to acquire an eligible vehicle by providing supporting documentation such as a letter of intent and emailing it directly to our team at publicfleets@energycenter.org. Next slide, and I think that wraps up my section. Are there any questions about the Clean Vehicle Rebate project as it pertains to fleets? Feel free to put your questions in the chat box if you have one. And it doesn't look like we have any questions. Great, so we'll go to the next presenter. Next slide. Up next, we have Mark Rogers, Kevin Weinberg, and David Lacombe from the good people over at Baker Electric. They're going to give us some of their expertise on electric vehicle infrastructure, on-site renewable energy, and on-site storage installations. Take it away, guys.
Great, thanks. This is Kevin Weinberg. I'm the Director of Renewables over here, focusing on solar and storage. And Mark Rogers focuses on electric vehicle charging stations along with David Lacombe. So as a team, we're here to help you learn a little bit more about things that we've found through our experience of doing a lot of these types of projects on things that you should look out for, or maybe that you've seen. And hopefully by the end of this section, we'll be able to answer some questions for you as well and help you on some of your projects. But if you don't know about Baker Electric, we're a full service electrical contractor. We've been in, Baker Electric was started in 1938, so 82 years old, 4th generation family owned, over 6,300 company-wide projects. We've done over 240 commercial solar projects. Mark can probably chime in. And how many EV projects have we completed, Mark?
I think we're at around 1,200. There we are.
Perfect. Thank you.
I love confirmation.
So we're a fairly large operation, and what that has allowed us to do is do a lot of volume of these types of projects and also have a lot of lessons learned. We do a ton of solar, utility scale solar. You can see there's 3 gigawatts of solar installed, gigawatt of energy storage installed, a ton of EV charging stations installed. So when we talk about optimizing systems, right? When you're looking to do these types of projects, and typically, a lot of times what we see is we've got one department that's dealing with fleets that wants to do EV charging stations and maybe some vehicle to grid, some experimental stuff, cutting edge things, and then we've got different departments that are looking to do solar for one of their buildings, and somebody else who's talking about creating an emergency facility, and getting all of these sort of things together in a way where you have communication with each other, where the facilities and the networks and the storage and the EV charging stations are communicating, where you can report and alert on these functions, where the systems are designed with construction and future maintenance in mind, and planned for growth, and planning for what other features might be coming out there in the marketplace that might help you lower your cost or provide additional services to employees or to the public. And so really, when you're looking at optimizing your systems, it's better to take a step back and look at your facilities as a whole, as an ecosystem, and determine what really are the objectives here, and are there overlapping objectives that should really be planned and considered together. Okay, so some of the most often overlooked, I'm sure Mark you may want to jump in here, but sometimes incentives that are available, people are unaware of those types of incentives. They can be utility incentives, they can be renewable energy credits. There could be other things that maybe you're not thinking about that were available for a project that you've already completed that you didn't realize. Sometimes understanding of utility bills and demand charges and how they work and how your facility operation works in conjunction with those things. Sometimes those things are overlooked. I think most facility managers and cities and counties and these types of organizations are getting a lot more smart and savvy and standardizing their monitoring platforms. But there's a lot of places where their systems are already obsolete, or they may have equipment and systems that are kind of island off in different areas and nobody's really sure if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. There's a lack of connectedness of these systems and a lack of ability to kind of take a high level overview and say, is our system working the way we had expected it? And is there a way that we can interconnect these to get better functionality out of it? Issues that we've seen on the EV side is lack of available power and ADA requirements, meaning you go to a facility and they want 12 EV charging stations and you need to double your service, or you need to add 30% onto your service, which requires a service upgrade. So there may not be enough power. And then in other situations, I think Mark might be able to attest to some of this, but having things installed without the permits. And those are things I think. Mark, anything there that I missed you want to expand on?
And that's important. We did see a project completely get interrupted, pulled from a decent contractor just because they had followed the advice of the owner not to pull permits. We encourage you to involve all the relative agencies early. So the graphics here, the top graphic is a pretty commonly used microgrid graphic. And this is only a couple of years old. And as we were looking for graphics to present for this particular slide, we noticed that almost all the microgrid graphics do not feature electric vehicle charging, and even those that are just a couple of years old. So if you were designing a microgrid today, you would certainly incorporate not just the demand that the electric vehicles are going to require, but also the opportunity for them to be a distributed energy resource. So the fact that this is just 2 years old is an indication of how quickly the EV charging market is growing. If you are unsure about how many charging ports do I need today and maybe in the future, the bottom graphic is presented by Southern California Edison. By clicking on their website, you can enter the type of organization and your city and how many parking spaces you have, and it will calculate for you how many EV charging stations you should have now and how many you should have that they estimate by 2025. So just a couple of resources for you. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. Sorry, I jumped ahead on that one quick, a little early. So this is something, Mark, again, you want to take over here?
Sure, and I will give credit to CALeVIP and ChargePoint, two of the better webcasts that we've participated in that both reiterated the same idea, which is beginning with the future in mind. When you're planning an integrated system, know what you want to accomplish, your priorities, get your team organized, including your subcontractors and contractors, and focus on two things, which is delivering a great user experience. And then I think even the bigger thing is planning for the future. So we have seen property owners that absolutely don't know any detail related to their utility bill. So we encourage people to look into your utility bill, your energy use, and specifically the demand charges. Those are going to be affected by any decent size scale EV charging application. For those of you that don't know what a demand charge is, it sometimes is 40 to 50% of your utility bill. And it's basically determined by the one peak that you have in a given month that is the tallest energy demand of that month. And sometimes that demand charge persists for up to a year. So these are the kind of things you need to consider, because a bunch of folks all plugging in at the same time, whether it's staff or school buses, are going to create that new peak, which could really influence your utility bill. And then there are software packages that can help you explain that, both hardware related and virtual. Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And to chime in here too as well, I've seen demand charges that are 80% of the bill in some cases. So as Mark said, it could have a tremendous impact on billing. And I would imagine most people on the webinar are savvy and have at least an understanding of demand versus consumption. So again, I think as Mark had mentioned, a good contractor is also a trusted advisor. So a trusted advisor is somebody who's going to come in and take a look at your situation. They're going to evaluate what your goals and your objectives are, and then form a solution that meets your criteria and your requirements. They're going to take your feedback and your input, and they're going to work collaboratively with you to make sure that your project is set up successfully to win from the beginning, right? And so you want to find those good contractors. There are a lot of them out there, and a lot of those contractors may also be some of the contractors that don't bid the low bid projects, because they know that really a good project is the result of a lot of good collaboration. And so again, and then talking lessons learned before design. Mark, do you want to hit this one real quick?
Sure. We are fortunate that we've been in business for 82 years now. We have built, as Baker Electric, just about every iteration you can imagine with solar storage and electric vehicle charging. For the EV installs, everything from hanging a plug-in charger on the wall to a couple dozen 350 kW liquid-cooled chargers at a raceway. We are happy to meet early with you and just share the lessons that we've learned. Walk the site, talk to you about the manufacturers that we're familiar with, the software platforms. If you are going to engage a third-party engineering firm, there are some very experienced ones in town. And then meet with whomever you select to perform the maintenance. If you already have a contractor on staff, they're going to maintain this equipment long-term. We'll sit down with them or take that role and try to educate you at no cost from all the lessons that we've learned in the installation and procurement.
Okay, so energy storage, what are the keys? We broke it down here really into 4 subsections. And in this case, you know, when you're looking at energy storage, there's a lot of different things energy storage can do. Energy storage can function as a way to lower your operating costs through demand reduction, just like Mark was talking about earlier, where up to 80% of your bill could be demand charges. And so understanding the purpose of why you want to use energy storage will drive the sizing and the design, and it will also drive the return on investment. If you know, there's a lot of talk about microgrids, and we've got some microgrid projects going on right now, but understanding the purpose of a microgrid, is it for backup? Are you expecting 5 days of outages? Do you want to be completely independent from the grid with backup generators incorporated into storage and solar? What's the purpose? So, you know, 90% of the projects that we've done to date in relation to storage have been just strictly demand reduction, with some backup applications for larger than just lighting load type of applications. But it's really understanding the purpose first, and then really designing the solution around that. And when you're looking at designing the solution, you want to also incorporate the inspection and maintenance of these assets, right? These aren't just assets that you buy and install, or that you finance and install, and then you walk away and they're just going to do their job for the next 20 years, right? These are all things I'm sure most of the people on the calls have to deal with this. The regular maintenance on these things, they do need to happen. So The same as with storage. It's not as much as maybe a big photovoltaic system, but you still need inspection and maintenance. So make sure to design for making that easy and cost effective. And then other considerations is when you're designing new buildings and new facilities and new, maybe EV electric fleet yards, oversizing the switchgear and conductors to allow for energy storage. Energy storage is treated like a load, or excuse me, like a generator. So it's like another utility, just like when you put solar on. And so as you add these power generating systems, the storage and the solar, the size of your main service may need to go up, or some of the components such as conductors or breakers might need to be changed out or increased. So those are all things to consider. And then lastly is the integration with solar systems. Depending on whether the goal is to provide the best return on investment, in most cases that would just be a solar photovoltaic system coupled with a storage system if you have the demand profile for it, and that would typically give you the best return on investment. But if you're looking to provide resiliency with that, well then you have to consider, we would reconsider how we integrate the storage system with the solar system. Because in most cases, and many people may not realize this, when you turn the photovoltaic system off, a grid type photovoltaic system, when the grid goes down, it turns off. And even if you have a storage system that's designed for load reduction, for demand reduction, and you have a solar system that's designed for energy generation, when the grid goes down, that doesn't mean that power is available to you. So that has to be designed into the system in advance. And so that's why it's so important to really understand these 4 key items. Okay, and storage and solar are similar in terms of how in our experience, we've seen other customers look at it. When they look at solar, typically it's a return on investment or it's a savings goal if it's a financed project. Public agencies typically use the power purchase agreement as a vehicle to finance these types of projects, which could be where a third party comes in, they own and operate the system, and then they sell your facility's energy at a lower rate. So you're generating power on site, you might get the benefit of shade in your parking lots, but it's owned and operated by somebody else. They take care of the maintenance, and the contracts and their agreements are with them, even though we might build the project. And then your other options, obviously, if it was a cash deal, sometimes that's when typically agencies will look at return on investment. They may have certain metrics that they use. So understanding what metrics you use to make the decision on how you would move forward on a project like this are going to be important to how that system is designed, maybe how much wiggle room you have to choose what products go into the project. Do you want something that's made in the US? That might be a little bit more expensive, but if the project's still meeting your hurdle, that may be something that's more attractive for your agency or jurisdiction. And then again, same rules apply for solar as it does for storage. Design it for easy inspection and maintenance, serviceability, constructability, reliability. Troy Strand, one of my mentors, is famous for saying that, and we believe that very strongly in our DNA in the renewables group. And design for efficient construction, meaning try and standardize as much as you can so you get those design efficiencies. You're able to, if it's a very large parking lot, we're not trying to take over your entire parking lot. You're having to relocate people. You want to have that construction, the systems and the schedules designed in a way that really works with your operations and facilities, and that really helps with that. And then understanding that when you put in solar carports, there are other things that impacts. It overflows into ADA compliance, okay? So if you put solar in, there are ADA requirements that have equal access, meaning you have to cover some ADA spots. So just like with EV charging stations that Mark might talk about here, we may have to restripe, repaint, path of travel, do those types of things if we can't locate the most cost-effective solar arrays over those ADA compliant spots. And then lastly, lighting. when you put in solar carports, it modifies the lighting of the lots, of the parking lots and the exposure. So we, on 100% of our projects, include lighting, LED lighting. Typically every other bay will have a strip, a lighting strip. And then that typically complies with the lighting requirements. And they may have dimmers where they turn down during certain times of the day, and they may have motion sensors where they'll turn on all the way when somebody is detected, when movement's detected. So those are all things that are kind of a byproduct of having these renewable energy systems installed, specifically in this case for carports. One other thing I'd like to say before we go to the next one, which is a lot of trees are removed in the effort to put these solar carports in. So understanding what rules are surrounding any protected trees, memorial trees, anything in your area or your jurisdiction that's protected, or maybe your community would be not happy with, or people in your, those are the types of things that you would also want to just consider when you're in the planning phase of this, where you're trying to decide what areas are acceptable to locate these systems. Okay, and I'm gonna pass it back over to Mark.
This is going to be taken by David Lacombe. David's our project manager and senior estimator for the EV charging team.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So this is our 5 W's of EV charging. And really, these are just simple questions to ask yourself or your organization to kind of help paint the picture of where you're going in the future with your EV infrastructure, and to make sure that you're taking all of these different steps into consideration. The first one being why. Why are you adding chargers, and what do you expect to gain? For a lot of people on this call, that might be a simple answer of fleet, switching your fleet over to electric. However, as we go through the rest of these, you'll see that may not necessarily be the case, and there may be added considerations there. So who is going to be using them, and what are their driving and charging profiles? Now, you may have the majority of your EV infrastructure going towards fleet, but it's important to look at now, as well as in the future, who might be using those chargers. Is it purely fleet personnel? Will you potentially be opening that up to additional non-fleet driving employees as a perk or employee retention measure? Or depending on what type of organization are you, will you potentially open some or any EV chargers up on your site to the public? It's important to keep in mind, just because those different profiles can drastically change the type of infrastructure you're looking at putting in, and the type of charger and software necessary to avoid having several different versions on your site. Where should they go? This is a pretty important one. A lot of times when we get involved with customers, fleet especially, they have a very specific spot in mind where the EV chargers should go, and oftentimes it's just wherever the cars are currently parked. So if it's fleet, they may have a fleet portion of their lot, and that's where the chargers need to go. And we challenge you to look at that from another perspective, especially trying to keep construction costs down. Oftentimes, where you want them to go based on your current setup may not be ideal constructability-wise, and keeping the construction costs down. The most important, and I'll go to it in further detail in the next slide, the most important 2 things to look at with where they should go, aside from what is ideal for your current setup, would be proximity to electrical infrastructure, where your electricity is going to be coming from, to avoid unnecessary conduit lengths and trenching and all that goes along with that. Additionally, ADA requirements. Fleet, technically, for the California Building Code, technically fleet is an exception to ADA compliance in most scenarios. However, there's a lot of entities that we deal with that are choosing to comply with the ADA compliance for the future, or because they may have a mixed use scenario, they have to. So it's important to keep in mind the ADA compliance aspect of this. It's essentially the exact same rules that you deal with a normal ADA stall, as far as path of travel and sloping, just with its own little caveats and changes for the EV charging. But that's important to keep in mind as well. When do you charge for the service, and are fees adjustable? Again, if it's fleet priority, then you are not going to be charging for the service. But like I said, if it's a mixed use, or if you intend to have mixed use in the future, it's important to look at that now to help guide your decisions as you start down this path. If you go to a fleet specific charger, for instance, that doesn't have the capabilities to adjust, then you may in the future have separate manufacturers and separate software platforms, which may be fine, but it's good to keep in mind as you're planning. Last, what procurement method should you use? Certain publicly funded programs and grants are going to obviously point you in a specific direction with this, so you may have some limited options depending on how you're funding this. But it is important to know, like I said, for now and in the future as you grow, as you will be growing the infrastructure, that there are a lot of options out there. The obvious is to roll it into your construction costs. Additionally, you can go and purchase directly from the manufacturers. But there is also very unique setups capable that we're starting to see kind of get a larger foothold in EV charging. One of those is charging as a service, which is now an option for many manufacturers. Essentially, it's almost like a leasing platform. Many of you are familiar with this. And there's also third-party companies that have an interest in getting involved and potentially covering the cost of some of the infrastructure in exchange for own and operating on your site and collecting LCFS credits or whatever it may be. So it's important to keep in mind as you go into the future. Next slide, please. And these last points are more pointed to the actual construction and keeping costs down and just really making sure that you've got your everything lined up. Number one, engage the utility early. We see this often as overlooked. If you're going to be putting in a decent size of EV charging infrastructure, which we often see for fleets specifically too, you may be looking at either an entirely new service. You may be looking at potentially tapping off your existing utilities and creating a new meter to help to get a dedicated meter for the EV charging. But depending on how much power you need, it may not be available, and you may be going to a brand new service from the utility and making sure that they're involved early to help paint that picture of what that's going to look like. That may dictate to some extent where you decide to put the chargers. They're going to tell you what point of connection you're going to be able to tap onto. So knowing that early before you get too far ahead of it is going to be only helping you down the line. Walk the site with an electrical contractor. Baker Electric, obviously we do a lot of this. The majority of these types of projects that we've been seeing are design build projects. So there is a lot of lessons learned there. And oftentimes, if you bring in your contractors a little too late in the game, there may be, you may have found that you're going in a direction that might start to change when you really start to look at it from our standpoint as far as constructability and keeping costs down. So getting us involved early is only going to help with that process, and we can kind of help guide you. Evaluate the charging need. This kind of ties into the location as well. But knowing what you plan to do now as well as in the future is going to be important. If it's purely fleet, then looking at where you're going to locate these chargers to charge your fleet. If you're going to have mixed use, it's going to be important to know where you want to put that to comply with ADA compliance, as well as being in close proximity to your power. We have an example on this photo. You can see the original plan for the customer was to locate chargers in the white circle. When it was all said and done, they ended up being placed in the yellow circle, a completely different location, which ended up being not a big deal. But as far as construction costs, it made a massive difference in what they ended up having to incur to actually establish this EV charging on this site. Additionally, you can see At the top, looks like some buses or semis. It's important to keep in mind where you're placing this. If you have the ability to shift down, for instance, that you see in that photo, if you can shift where you place your current fleet so that the EV charging infrastructure can be greatly diminished, the lengths of charging can be diminished. Other times it's as simple as retraining folks as to where they need to be and restriping the parking lot, and then you can cut your costs substantially. Evaluate the software needs. As mentioned, if it's pure fleet, your software needs are going to be potentially less. Almost all the smart chargers now are going to have the data collection and analytics necessary that you're going to need. But where it gets a little bit more narrow is the software and charging platforms that can also double as being useful also for public use or employees. So if you want to have one platform that can both charge your fleet as well as use that same platform to allow access control or different charging profile costs for employees or public, whatever it may be, it's important to look at that now to get to align what type of software and charging platform you need for your site. And then lastly, as mentioned and with the other slides as well, storage and solar, plan for future expansion. If you're already going to have a project going in where you're going to be trenching through your parking lot or running conduit through your building, planning for it now and putting in a little bit of extra infrastructure is going to cost substantially less to do it while the trench is open than it would be to put in exactly what you need now. As we all know, we've seen how EV charging is growing, and so are the regulations for it. So what you need now is almost certainly not going to be what you need 5 years and 10 years from now. So putting a little bit of extra work in now for the small investment will only help you in the future because you will need to expand. And that, I think that brings us to a close on ours. Next slide is the final slide for us.
So this is Kevin. One thing I would just say is, David, thanks for doing that. Thanks for going through the details and providing those tips. Is that a lot of the same tips that you're providing apply to renewables as well? The monitoring platforms, making sure you're using the same types of monitoring platforms, or if you want and are considering that, the locations is the same, just like what you were showing there. Is if there are carports that are far away from the service, just like with EV charging stations, you'd bring them back. And then just like you were talking, walking the site and making sure that the systems are as close as possible to the main service. I think those were all really good tips that apply to both sides of what we're talking about here. So
right on. Well, thank you guys. Thank you so much. Those were some great, thorough tips and considerations, especially thinking about your site holistically, connecting with the right stakeholders and contractors early, and thinking about the future and scalability of building a microgrid and how it can really save you a ton in costs and really help down the line. So great presentation, guys. Thank you so much. I'm personally very excited about the future of microgrids and especially how EVs can play a part with V2G. So very excited about the future. And when it comes to mitigating those high demand charges, on-site storage is going to be a great tool, which we will cover later with SGIP, the self-generation incentive project. And I'd like to reiterate, another tool that Baker mentioned to help mitigate those costs and really optimize your fleet is utilizing fleet/energy management technologies, which is something that we will cover on our next webinar. So keep an eye out for that. We do see some questions in the chat, but we will hold them to the end as we want to make sure that all the panelists have a chance to present by the end of the hour, where it looks like we're running up pretty close. Mark, there is a request if you can send the SCE charger tool into the chat, a link would be great. Now we're gonna head over to the incentive programs that will help complement your EV fleet and help you drive down your cost. Up next, we have Divya Mathur to give us an overview of CALeVIP, the California Electric Vehicle Incentive Project. Take it away, Divya.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you to CVRP for allowing me to present today. Hi everyone, my name is Divya Mathur and I work at the Center for Sustainable Energy as a project coordinator for the California Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Project, CALeVIP. CALeVIP provides regional EV charging incentive projects throughout California. CALeVIP is funded through the California Energy Commission's Clean Transportation Program, and currently total project funding is $73.5 million. With an increasing need for electric vehicles, the need for electric vehicle charging infrastructure rises. The goal of CALeVIP is to introduce greater accessibility to clean energy and alternative fuel transportation options within California by implementing incentive projects throughout the state, providing a streamlined application process, and providing convenient access to charging infrastructure. The project helps uphold the state's climate change policies, including less petroleum dependence and greater decarbonization. CALeVIP provides rebates for the purchase and installation of Level 2 and DC fast chargers. To qualify for a rebate, your site must be an eligible site type. Eligible site types include commercial sites, workplaces, multi-unit dwellings, fleets, and public facilities. Depending on your site type, you could be eligible for either DC fast charger rebates, Level 2 rebates, or both. Light-duty fleets are eligible for Level 2 rebates. For the purposes of CALeVIP, the definition of a fleet is a group of motor vehicles owned or leased by a business, government agency, or other organization rather than by an individual or family themselves. Chargers may be public or private, but must be shared use, meaning the charger isn't dedicated to a single vehicle or someone's dedicated parking spot. For fleet eligibility, chargers must primarily serve light-duty vehicles, but can serve medium and heavy-duty vehicles as a secondary use. The primary use of the chargers cannot be for medium or heavy-duty vehicles. To learn more about eligibility and project requirements, please visit calevip.org. CALeVIP operates 6 active projects spanning through California, with 3 new incentive projects launching in 2020. The Sonoma Coast Incentive Project will launch in July, the Peninsula Silicon Valley Incentive Project in the fall, and the San Diego County Incentive Project in the winter. Different projects have different rebate and funding amounts. Visit the website and each specific project landing page for more information on available projects and their associated rebate amounts. In addition to our incentive projects, we also offer a variety of resources to help with your installation. Today, I'd like to highlight CALeVIP Connects, which is a great tool to help kickstart your EV charger installation project. Through CALeVIP Connects, you can connect with regional electric vehicle service providers to help with your charging project. You can connect with equipment manufacturers, locate local installers and electricians, and more. CALeVIP Connects is also a great place to list your business. Register your business profile on Connects and have leads sent directly to your inbox. Visit the CALeVIP Connects link at the bottom of the slide to get started. That was the conclusion of the webinar, but please contact the CALeVIP phone line or email to get in touch with our team. We're available to answer any questions you may have and help you begin a successful installation project. To stay up to date with the latest CALeVIP news and to find out more information on upcoming projects, we encourage you to subscribe to the CALeVIP newsletter, which can be done by visiting calevip.org. Thanks for tuning in, and thank you to CVRP for allowing CALeVIP to participate in your webinar.
Right on. Thanks, Divya. We'll also have her contact information or CALeVIP's contact information at the end of the presentation. We're going to go ahead and move along over to Joe Bick from the Self-Generation Incentive Project, and he will go over that program. Take it away, Joe.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for attending. My name is Joe Bick, and I'm an associate manager at the Center for Sustainable Energy. And this morning, I'm going to be talking a little bit about energy storage and the Self-Generation Incentive Program. All right, so a little bit on Energy Storage 101. Energy storage is a technology that is capable of absorbing energy, storing it for a period of time, and discharging the energy at a later time. There are several types of energy storage, including chemical energy storage, That would be batteries with varying chemical compositions. Then there's also thermal energy storage, in which energy is being stored in the form of heat or cold. Think a very large ice cube that could be used for refrigeration or air condition cooling. And then finally, there's mechanical storage, which could be a flywheel, or the more common example would be pumped hydro, which would be a water reservoir or tank that would be used to store potential energy and then would use that potential energy to generate energy at a later time. At the moment, the most commercially available energy storage systems are lithium-ion batteries. Lithium-ion batteries are the type we find in our phones and computers and find in the majority of battery electric vehicles to date. There are other chemical compositions on the market and a lot of research and development going into new chemical batteries, but for now, lithium ion's kind of the big player within the market. It's important to note that when we're talking about energy storage systems, we're not just referring to the batteries. Batteries are a single component of the system. Then there's inverters. Inverters are what make the system capable of charging and discharging energy. They're the controls. The controls are the brains of the system, telling the mechanical parts when to do what. The controls are closely related to the battery management software that Baker Electric mentioned. And then there's the HVAC and coolant systems contained within the larger system to ensure safety and maintain the health of the batteries. All right, so we already touched on energy storage and inverters, but I wanted to highlight real quick the three main values that are important to be familiar with when it comes to energy storage. There's the rated capacity, or the kW, or kilowatt value, which is the instantaneous power capability of the system. Then there's the energy storage capacity, the kWh, or kilowatt hour, which is the amount of energy that can be delivered over a period of time. And finally, there's the duration of the battery, which is the amount of time a system can output its rated power capacity. The duration is typically reported in hours or fractions of an hour. Mark and Kevin from Baker Electric did a great job explaining what demand charge management is and the importance of being familiar with those financial implications. So I'll try not to talk too much more about that. Energy storage systems are a resource that can be used for a variety of purposes. Besides demand charge management, another financial benefit would be time of use arbitrage, which I'll go into in a little more detail in a moment. There's also grid and environmental benefits associated with energy storage systems, and that would be in the form of renewable energy integration and potential greenhouse gas reductions depending on the charge and discharge profiles of the energy storage system. And then lastly, there can also be backup power and resiliency benefits with energy storage. When it comes to EV charging stations, energy storage systems can play a very complementary role to the charging stations. Energy storage can be the yin to their yang, if you will. If there's a standalone charging station that has its own electric meter that is only for charging stations and is not being used for other loads at the facility, then the energy storage that is paired with those charging stations can provide demand charge management to the EV charging stations themselves, which can reduce electricity costs associated with the operation of those charging stations significantly. The storage system can perform time of use arbitrage. Sorry, there's a minor typo. It says time of us. It should be time of use. And this would be charging the batteries when grid energy is less expensive, and then using the energy in the batteries to charge the EVs when the grid energy is more expensive. Another use case we are starting to see is mitigating distribution grid upgrade costs. So in some instances, the addition of more EV charging stations would require a grid update with the utility. By adding a significant amount of energy storage capacity, the combination of the site's current power supply and the energy storage capacity could allow the charging stations to deliver a higher total power to charging electric vehicles than the current site's power supply from the grid. So power from the grid plus the power from the batteries would be greater than just the power from the grid. So we're starting to see that on some new use cases, which is pretty exciting and is a potential way to avoid the extra cost associated with a grid upgrade. So there are energy storage rebates through the Self-Generation Incentive Program. This program is also referred to as SGIP or SGIP. SGIP offers financial incentives for the installation of clean and efficient energy storage technologies. It is available to the electric and/or gas customers of Pacific Gas and Electric, Southern California Edison, SoCalGas, and San Diego Gas and Electric. My organization, Center for Sustainable Energy, or CSE, is the SGIP program administrator for San Diego Gas and Electric service territory. At a high level, I just want to highlight our program metrics page, which is the first link on this slide. This is where you can find real-time current incentive rates and available funding within each budget category within the SGIP program. The chart here highlights some of the current rates and funding statuses statewide for non-residential energy storage systems. So the rate can really vary depending on which budget category you'd be eligible for. The large scale storage is more or less the general market budget. There's two different rates there. There's one rate if an entity is claiming the ITC for the battery storage. That rate's 25 cents per watt hour. And then if they're not claiming the ITC, the rate would be 35 cents per watt hour. And there is open funding available within this budget category throughout the state. There's also a non-residential storage equity budget. This is a more targeted budget category for businesses and entities located in low-income census tracts and disadvantaged communities. The rate is significantly higher at 85 cents per watt hour. And as of now, the entire budget throughout the state is on a wait list for that category. There's also equity resiliency, which has a rate of $1 per watt hour, so the highest rate. And that's also targeted for equity customers, but then in addition to that, they are located in districts that are high fire threat districts. So they fall within areas that have been identified in the state that are most impacted by the wildfires. And that's an additional eligibility criteria for that budget category. CSE, PG&E, and SCE territories are currently on a wait list for that budget category, but there is open available funding within SoCalGas's SGIP service territory. There's another bullet here that will go, the link here will go into much more detail about what the eligibility criteria for each budget category is. So there's a link and a section called out in our handbook, and then there's also some resources on this link to our SGIP resources page. If you're going to be participating in the SGIP program, it is important to be familiar with the SGIP sizing requirements. So one path forward in terms of sizing requirements is that energy storage systems may be sized up to the host customer's previous 12-month annual peak demand. So the most electricity that they used in a given moment over the last year. In this example, if a customer has a peak demand of 650 kilowatts, they'd be eligible in SGIP for up to 650 kilowatts energy storage system size. There's another path forward, which would be for new construction or projects with future load growth. In that example, if the customer's peak demand is 1,000 kW, but they plan to install EV charging stations that are estimated to increase the demand by another 500 kW, then the customer may be eligible for 1,500 kilowatt energy storage system size. It's important to note that engineering estimates must be provided to justify that future load growth when you're applying into the program. And that high new load, the estimated future load of 1,500 kilowatts in this example, must be substantiated before our program will pay out the incentive. I'm not going to cover all the information on this slide, but if you're interested in participating in SGIP, it's good to be familiar with the different participant definitions and the different roles and responsibilities associated with each definition. One thing to highlight is that the SGIP application process is complex and technical in nature. Therefore, in the majority of cases, the contractor or the developer handles the SGIP application process on the behalf of the customer. This slide is packed with helpful links and resources relating to our program, as well as CSE's SGIP contact information. There's also some links to the CPUC's website, including Find an Installer tool, some brochures, webinars, and more. And then just a reminder, if you're located in PG&E, Southern California Edison, or SoCalGas's utility service territory, those utilities administer the SGIP program themselves, and they're the best contact for projects that are located in their service territory. So the final bullet on this slide will link to our statewide SGIP contact information. That being said, if you have any questions about the self-generation incentive program at a very high level, or just interested in learning more, you can reach out to us directly at CSE via the phone line and the email that are outlined on this slide. I believe that is it, and then we could go into questions if anyone has any.
Great, thank you so much, Joe, for covering the self-generation incentive program. We are going to hop into some questions. Let's see here. We did have one question concerning, apologies, the new coming requirements for EVSEs for public, EVSEs from CARB and Department of Weights and Measures. So Divya from CALeVIP helped me answer this one. Recent CARB regulations will begin requiring credit card readers on new charging equipment after January 1st, 2022. And there will be a 10-year requirement to add credit card readers on existing chargers that were installed before January 1st, 2022. Let's see what other questions we had. Are there any rebates for low-speed EVs? I believe you're talking about neighborhood electric vehicles. I know there used to be a rebate. I currently do not know of any. Are there any presenters or panelists that know of any low-speed EV incentives coming through? All right, and then lastly, there was a question about ADA for employees and or public. I believe Baker already covered that, but if Baker Electric wants to chime in, kind of give the insight and requirements for ADA for employees and or the public, that'd be great.
Yeah, I can touch on that. So the ADA requirements, without going too deep into detail, California Building Code now requires that you add ADA compliant EV charging stalls when you're doing new EV charging infrastructure. So there is a chart that exists from the California Building Code that goes into a little further detail, but essentially for most scenarios it would stop at probably 25 or less. So I'll cover that. For 0 to 4 charging stations, so essentially the first one, you have to provide a van accessible ADA charging stall, which is 12 feet wide with a 5-foot access aisle. It also has to have the same sloping requirements as ADA stalls, 2% or less, as well as a path of travel. It is not blue striped though, so it's a little confusing sometimes. What I try to tell people is it's similar to an ADA stall in a restroom, where it is sized accordingly, but it's for anyone to use, and that's the same case here. The ADA charging stalls are sized and sloped and have the same access requirements, but they're not blue striped and they're non-enforced. Now, once you go to your 5th charging stall, now you have to provide, in addition to that van accessible stall, now you have to provide a standard accessible stall, which is a 9-foot wide stall with a 5-foot access aisle. Now they can share that same access aisle, so you would have, in that scenario, ideally, you'll have a van accessible with an access aisle in the middle, and then a standard stall on the right-hand side of that access aisle, all of which complying with the 2% slope and path of travel. It goes on beyond there, but that covers you until 25 stalls. After that, there's some further requirements, and it continues to grow from there. But that is what that is referring to. So it is a little challenging on existing sites to find new stalls. I know people struggle as it is just to meet ADA requirements in general. But one thing to keep in mind is that when we create these stalls, we will have to delete a stall to make, obviously for the 12-foot wide van accessible stall in the access aisle. However, they do not look at it as deleting the stall. So as far as your stall counts are concerned, yes, we will take one away, but as far as your counts on a print, you will have the same amount of stall counts, if that makes sense. But that's pretty much it in a nutshell. And it technically fleet is exempt as of right now. And it's really the only two exemptions is deeded stalls and fleet. But a lot of public entities, for instance, are choosing to comply and not use the exemption and actually provide that van accessible stall for their own reasons or for the future.
Great, thank you, David. There's another question, just to confirm, ADA is for public stations only?
ADA requirements are for any charging stalls outside of deeded and fleet. So if you're going to have stalls, let's say you're going to put in 15 EV charging stalls on your property, but you're going to have some of those fleet and some of them for employees, you would have to comply with the ADA requirements, because the ones that are open to employees would need ADA compliance. The only ones that wouldn't is if it was dedicated to fleet or a deeded stall.
Great, thanks for clarifying, David.
And David, you might clarify what deeded means. I believe David's referring to multi-unit dwellings, assigned parking spaces. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, deeded stalls meaning it's tied to the property owner. So, for instance, yeah, right, in a condominium complex, for instance, a downtown high-rise condo, their stall is deeded to their unit. That stall doesn't have to comply with ADA requirements. And then, other than that, it would just be fleet, pure fleet. So, if you have stalls that are for employee use in general, those would need to comply with the ADA requirements.
Thank you, David.
All right, on. Thank you, Mark and David. All right, we'll move on and finish up here. So next slide. We do have an upcoming fleet electrification guide that we're very excited to put out there. It's a holistic guide for electrifying your fleet, so it covers a lot of the topics that we covered here, but it also gives you extra tools, resources, and other considerations when you're electrifying your fleet to really help you realize a quicker return on investment and really optimize your fleet to the fullest. Next slide. We do have another upcoming webinar in a few months here. So that one's going to be focused more on charging stations and their fleet management best practices. So these are technologies that you can couple with your charging stations and your energy storage and make sure that you're really utilizing and optimizing your fleet to the fullest. And then after that, we'll cover clean energy options, tools, and resources in our last webinar. If you do have any suggestions or things you want us to cover in our upcoming webinars, please shoot me an email, and my contact information will be at the bottom or the next slide here. And here is everybody's contact information. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. This webinar will be posted onto our Fleet YouTube for future reference. And I'd like to say thank you again to all of our panelists for providing some great insight and considerations to installing EV infrastructure and on-site storage, as well as future considerations for renewable energy and tying that all in together into a resilient microgrid. I'd like to thank all the attendees that stuck around. I appreciate your time, and I wish you guys have a great rest of the week. Thank you again.